You are standing in a market square 4,000 years ago in the city of Ur. Around you, people are trading grain for wool, wool for copper, copper for oil, oil for labor. Nobody is exchanging coins. There are no coins yet. There is no cash register, no wallet, no bank. And yet everyone here knows exactly what everything is worth, because in the storehouse behind the temple, a scribe has already written it down. A jar of oil equals so many liters of barley. A day of labor equals so much silver, even though no silver ever changes hands that day. You are living inside one of the strangest inventions our species ever made, and you don't even notice it, because by now it feels less like an invention and more like a law of nature. So how did humans invent money? The answer is not simple, and it does not start where most people assume it does. Let's start with the story you were probably taught, because it's wrong, and the way it's wrong tells you something important. The textbook version goes like this. Before money, humans bartered. You had chickens, I had shoes, we swapped. Barter was clumsy, so eventually someone invented coins to fix it. It's a clean story. It shows up in economics textbooks going back to Adam Smith in 1776. There's just one problem. Anthropologists have spent over a century looking for a real society that ran primarily on barter between strangers, and they have not found one. Cambridge anthropologist Caroline Humphrey wrote in a widely cited 1985 paper that no example of a pure barter economy has ever been described, let alone the emergence of money from it. Not one. Anywhere. Ever. That should stop you. If barter didn't create money, what did? David Graeber, an anthropologist at the London School of Economics, spent years digging through 5,000 years of economic records to answer that question, publishing his findings in a 2011 book called Debt, The First 5,000 Years. His argument reframes the entire timeline. Before money, Graeber says, humans didn't barter, they kept track. In small communities where everyone knew everyone, you didn't trade a chicken for shoes on the spot. You gave your neighbor a chicken because they needed one, and they owed you. Not a formal debt, a social one. Memory was the currency. And memory works fine, right up until the population grows past the point where everyone can remember what everyone owes everyone else. Think about what that means. Money wasn't invented to replace barter. It was invented to replace memory. The oldest evidence for that shift comes not from coins, but from grain. Around 3100 BC in the Sumerian city of Uruk, the same city where writing itself was being invented for accounting purposes, scribes began recording debts and payments using a unit called the silver shekel, roughly 8.3 grams. Here's the strange part. For most of Sumerian history, actual silver rarely changed hands. The shekel was a unit of account, a number in a ledger, used to price grain, land, rent, and labor, even when the payment itself was made in barley or wool. You could owe someone 10 shekels and settle the debt entirely in onions. The shekel was money in the sense that mattered most. It let strangers agree on value. Nobody had to carry it. It just had to exist as an idea everyone trusted. By 1754 BC, this idea had become law. King Hammurabi of Babylon carved 282 laws into a stone stele, now sitting in the Louvre, and buried inside the legal code are prices. A physician's fee for setting a broken bone, the wage for a field laborer, the value of an ox. All of it denominated in silver shekels, whether or not silver was actually present. This is the moment debt stopped being a memory between neighbors and became a number enforced by a state. Money had a government behind it now, and a government behind money is a very different animal than a favor between friends. But a unit of account is still not what most people picture when they hear the word money. For that, you need something you can hold. And long before anyone minted a coin, humans had already solved that problem with something almost nobody expects. Seashells. Cowrie shells. Small, glossy, and nearly impossible to counterfeit by hand, were used as currency across an almost unbelievable span of geography and time. Archaeological digs at sites tied to China's Shang dynasty, roughly 1200 BC, have turned up cowries stored in careful counted hoards, and by the time bronze casting became widespread, Chinese metalworkers were literally casting bronze imitations of cowrie shells because the shell shape itself had become synonymous with value. Look at the Chinese character for money, kai, and you are looking at a stylized cowrie shell. The idea was so durable it got fossilized into language. And it wasn't just China. Cowries moved along Indian Ocean trade networks into East Africa, where they remained a functioning currency well into the 19th century, and they turn up in West African economies documented by European traders as far back as the 1500s. A shell from a beach in the Maldives could end up paying for cloth in Timbuktu. Nobody organized that. No king declared cowries the official currency of 3 continents. It happened because the shell had 2 properties that turn out to be the actual DNA of money. It was hard to fake, and everyone agreed it mattered. That's the real discovery hiding inside this whole story. Money doesn't require metal. It doesn't require a government. It only requires collective belief in scarcity plus collective belief in trust, which is why one of the strangest currencies ever documented worked perfectly well without ever physically moving at all. On the tiny Micronesian island of Yap, communities used enormous carved limestone discs called rye stones, some over 3.6 meters across, as currency. American anthropologist William Henry Furness III documented the system firsthand in 1903 in his book The Island of Stone Money. Some rye stones were so large that moving them was impractical or flatly impossible, so the Yapese simply didn't move them. Ownership changed. The stone stayed exactly where it was. Furness recorded one story of a family whose stone had sunk to the bottom of the sea during transport generations earlier and was never recovered, yet everyone on the island still agreed the family owned it, and its value as currency was never questioned. Nobody could see it, nobody could touch it. It still worked as money, because money was never really the object, it was always the agreement. Sit with that for a second, because it rewires everything you think you know about a $20 bill in your pocket. Now bring that same logic back to the Mediterranean, roughly 600 BC, in the Kingdom of Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey. Here, something genuinely new appears. Small lumps of electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy, stamped with an official mark. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, credited the Lydians with inventing coinage, and in 1904, archaeologist David Hogarth, excavating the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, recovered dozens of these early Lydian coins from a foundation deposit, giving historians a hard archaeological anchor for one of the oldest coinages on Earth. What made a Lydian coin different from a shekel or a shell wasn't the material, it was the stamp. The mark on the coin was the state saying, "We guarantee this weight and this purity, so you don't have to weigh and test every payment yourself." The coin outsourced trust from the individual merchant to the government. That single idea, a government-backed guarantee stamped onto a portable object, is the direct ancestor of every coin and every banknote that followed for the next 2,600 years. And once trust could be stamped onto metal, it didn't take long before humans realized trust could be written on paper instead. By the 7th century AD, merchants in Tang Dynasty China were using promissory certificates called feiqian, flying money, so that a trader could deposit coins in one city and redeem an equivalent note in another without hauling heavy cash across dangerous roads. In medieval Italy, the same instinct reappeared independently. Banking families in Florence and Genoa, most famously the Medici starting in the early 1400s, issued bills of exchange, IOUs, that could be traded, endorsed, and passed between merchants who never met each other, backed by nothing except the reputation of the bank that signed it. Money had officially detached from metal. What people were actually trusting wasn't gold anymore. It was an institution's promise. That detachment kept accelerating for the next 500 years, and each step followed the exact same pattern. Physical backing slowly dissolves, and trust in an institution replaces it. Nations spent the 19th and early 20th centuries on the gold standard, where paper currency was, in theory, redeemable for a fixed amount of gold sitting in a vault. In July 1944, delegates from 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and pegged the entire post-war global financial system to the US dollar, which itself was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. For nearly 3 decades, that was the architecture of the modern world's money. Then, on August 15, 1971, in a televised address, President Richard Nixon suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold entirely. No referendum, no global vote. A single policy decision, made largely to stop foreign governments from draining U.S. gold reserves, and overnight, the entire concept of money shifted its foundation one final time. From that day forward, the dollar, and by extension most of the world's currency, was backed by nothing physical at all. Not gold, not silver, not shells, not stone, just the shared belief that other people would keep accepting it tomorrow. Economists call this fiat currency, from the Latin for let it be done, which, if you think about it, is a remarkably honest name. Money exists because we say it does. So here's the answer. How did humans invent money? They did it in layers, the same way they invented almost everything else that runs civilization. First, they replaced memory with a unit of account, so debts between strangers could be tracked without anyone having to remember every favor. Then they attached that unit to something scarce and hard to fake, silver, shells, stone, so trust had a physical anchor. Then a state stepped in and stamped its authority onto that object, turning private trust into public guarantee. Then merchants realized the object itself was optional, that a signed promise could carry the same weight as metal in your hand. Then governments spent centuries slowly peeling the physical backing away entirely, gold standard to Bretton Woods to nothing, until all that remained was the original ingredient this whole story started with: belief. Shared, collective, unspoken belief that the person across the counter will accept what you're handing them, and that the next person will accept it from them. Was this inevitable? Very likely. Any group of humans large enough to include strangers who don't personally trust each other, and organized enough to trade complex goods across distance and time, seems to eventually converge on some version of portable trusted value, whether that's a shekel, a shell, a stone, or a signature. The specific materials were accidents of geography: cowries where there were coastlines, silver where there were mines, limestone where there was limestone. But the underlying invention, a shared fiction of value that strangers agree to honor, was coming no matter what. Georg Simmel, the German sociologist, wrote in his 1900 work The Philosophy of Money that money is perhaps the purest expression of trust in a form that has been abstracted from all individual relationships. He was writing before credit cards, before digital transfers, before a number on a phone screen could move a life savings in half a second, and he was already describing exactly what you're holding right now, or, more accurately, not holding, because you probably don't carry cash anymore either. Tonight you will pay for something: a coffee, a fare, a bill, and no metal will change hands, no paper will move, nothing physical will exist at any point in the transaction, except two numbers changing on two separate screens, somewhere in a server you will never see. You will not think about it. But that transaction, whatever it is the direct descendant of a Sumerian scribe, pricing an ox in silver he never touched, of a Yap Island family who owned a stone at the bottom of the ocean, of a Lydian mark stamped into metal so strangers wouldn't have to weigh their trust in each other. For 96% of human existence, none of it existed. And the only reason it exists now is that thousands of years ago, someone needed to owe a neighbor a favor, and instead of remembering it, they wrote it down.